A couple weeks off, but not a better time to come back here on a Monday talking Big Four hoops. And joined by my man, Mike Bunt. As always, I'm Jonathan Snyder. Talking Big Four hoops, Western New York College basketball. Talking all things that are St. Bonaventure, University of Buffalo, Canisius, and Niagara. But Mike, a somewhat special, maybe not the right word for this episode, but a specific episode. We're going to talk about this UB job search or lack thereof that's going on right now. So to catch everybody up, as everyone knows, a couple weeks ago, University of Buffalo dismissed head coach Jim Weitzel, and we're doing a national search to find his replacement. Mike, I think that we were all under the assumption that we didn't know the relationship between the athletic department, specifically Mark Allnut and Brian Hodson, assistant with Nate Oates in Alabama, but we assumed that potentially there was going to be some interest there. We also knew that Adam Cohen, associate head coach at Xavier, was going to be atop that list with his ties to Buffalo. We found out today, and we trust a lot in the updates from Jonah Bronstein, who a local reporter does a great job. But he reported today, roughly 8 hours ago, that Adam Cohen turned down the job. And as I stated earlier, associate head coach at Xavier, Williamsville North grad, and a former UB student manager. So that was, I think, the top choice, Mike. We also heard from Jonah that Division II coach Ben McCullum, four-time national champion at that level, was on campus last week for a visit. We found out moments after that he also turned the job down. As if things couldn't get any worse, the head coach at Jared Calhoun from Youngstown State also turned the job down. Mike, I am just going to throw it over to you, and I want to tell everyone, too, we're going to be joined by Kevin Massari here shortly as well to get his thoughts that are always very insightful on everything UB athletics. But, Mike, I want to get your thoughts here on what is just a disastrous day, if true, on all these accounts of UB swinging and missing on these potential head coaches.
Yeah, it's pretty embarrassing, John, and I'm glad that we're going to have Kevin joining us. Feel free to bring him up whenever you have a chance right now, and we can kind of toss it back and forth between the three of us.
Yeah, I'm going to throw Kevin in right now, Mike, if that's okay. He's going to join us. And Kevin, I want to thank you for joining us and popping in here to talk UB. So, Mike, yeah, keep going on that, and let me know what you think about this.
Yeah, it's a disastrous day for UB basketball. You think about it, 4 years ago, they're coming off a 32-4 season, a top 25 appearance for the entire season. Their second year with an NCAA tournament win. They lose Nate Oates, but there was an offer for over $800,000 that he originally signed an extension for. Most fans thought UB was ready to take that next step to be a consistently good mid-major. They had a coaching search. They had a bunch of big-name candidates, Lanier, Luke Murray, who we're now seeing at UConn. There was obviously Weitzel. We thought Hodson was in the running, and Dane Fife. Ultimately, they go with Weitzel out of left field. The program has taken a spin downwards. And now you fast forward to this coaching search. They finally get rid of Weitzel, and they have prominent names, Adam Cohen, Ben McCollum, who is a national championship winning head coach at D2, has won 4. You hear guys like Brian Hodson. Was he involved? Was he not involved? And the thought was that UB was going to take a big approach, make up for everything that went wrong the last 4 years. And here we are 4 years later in the same situation where they're getting turned down. They are not doing what it takes to close the deal. They realized 4 years ago that they didn't properly vet their candidates, and then they were forced to settle with Jim Weitzel for continuity purposes. How do you go through the same thing 4 years later? Like, they're paying a $100,000 buyout now because they chose not to wait. And then you don't even lock down the guys that you want. You didn't have an idea of compensation or anything like that. And now you're having your third choice guy in Jared Calhoun turn you down because you don't have NIL resources. And we have some information that Kevin and I both have confirmed with different people that the main reason why Adam Cohen turned down the job was because UB wasn't willing to give him the term that he wanted on his contract. He wanted a 6-year deal. UB was not willing to give him that. So your first choice turns you down. Your second choice reportedly backed out. Your third choice turns you down because you don't have an NIL collective in place. Your facilities are second rate. You have your team practicing where regular students play intramural basketball. It's an embarrassing day for UB basketball because they went through all these mistakes 4 years ago, and they apparently haven't learned anything. But Kev, I think you can back up a lot of what I was saying. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think information's coming in at all times for the UB coaching search, which by all accounts is under a good amount of wraps, but it's easy to kind of dive into the situation. I think there's a lot of guessing by UB right now at why candidates are declining. From what I've been told, they're guessing as well. The candidates don't come out and say personally that you aren't giving me 6 years, I'm going to decline your deal. Although UB's making the assumption that that might be the reason for it. When it comes to the exact search, and I've been told a lot about Cohen from day one of him being the top choice, Cohen actually wanting Buffalo. They couldn't get it done. There's been a lot of talks about the years around Cohen. There's also been talks about, could he move here? Is it a better job from Xavier, a team that by all accounts could have been looking at a national championship, didn't get it done just recently, but is in the top 8. He is one of the best recruiters in the country, might even be better than Coach Ryan Hodson at Alabama, but they're neck and neck. Now, I've been told that Hodson was never called for this job, not once. So he was never offered the position. He's never even offered to discuss the position. No idea why. He was backed publicly by donors. I'm not really sure what happened, why he wasn't the right fit. Maybe it was that when he got on the plane with the Alabama colors really early on, didn't know if he'd be able to beat out other candidates, whether recommended by the coaching committee that UB has since hired or not. So he just initially took the job and ran with it, and he equaled an Arkansas State job. Is it better than UB? Probably not at this stage. However, it's still a pretty big job for him, and he has the recruiting chops, and we'll follow his career there. But by all accounts, UB was never in on that. Cohen was also does not look like it will get done. There was extra reasons there, and then you kind of transition over to maybe Washington, who was never really a serious candidate from what I was told into this job search. And then you get into McCollum. Was that a resume pattern? Was that to pump up his stock? That's certainly what it seems like, is I don't believe personally he was ever interested in Buffalo. And that was more of a here's my resume. I'm getting looked at by at one time one of the top mid-major programs in the country. Come after me, everybody. I'm the best D2 coach in the country. That's what it seems like there. And then NIL issues all across the board when it comes to Youngstown State. He's having Calhoun's having NIL issues with Youngstown currently, and he did not want to continue that, even if it's a little bit of a conference bump and a little bit of a job bump. Didn't feel like dealing with the NIL issues here in Buffalo either. So that leaves them pretty thin right now. It doesn't seem like the search firm is ever amounting to anything. They went with it the first time, didn't go with anything. They're going with it again. Those candidates aren't working out for them. So it just seems to be like Allnut spinning his wheels with the coaching search and using public money to do so. I thought the extra year on Weitzel's contract was egregious. I didn't see the reason for it to begin with. I don't believe after the 2021 season that he earned it. I do believe a trip to the tournament would have been good for it, but a 5+1, escalating his contract buyout to $500K. That's a major problem in this search, and one that the basketball program is going to hear heat from the top. So they have to account for that $500K. They could have waited an extra week to April 6th to lower that to $400K. I'm assuming they were honing in on Cohen. That's my suggestion. When they got wind of him maybe not accepting for either contract reasons or not wanting to move from Xavier to Buffalo for other reasons, maybe personal, they pivoted to Northwest Missouri State. He came on kind of like a look at me tour, and that never amounted to anything. And the candidates that I've heard at this stage aren't interested in the job. Mike Manega etc. So I'm not exactly sure. Are they going to pivot to a current Niagara coach? What are they going to do? I don't know. I don't have any good reads as I'm kind of diving into it all now on who they might actually be interested in.
Do they even know?
I think they know, but at the end of the day, Mike, do they get they've had their top choices interested in the jobs and they all decline it. So even if they do know, that doesn't mean anything, because unlike maybe other pro sports teams or either larger college teams, they're generally getting one, maybe choice two, maybe three if things are going south. But UB's used three, maybe four if you consider Washington in this. He was in their top four. So like we're looking at the fourth candidate. I don't even think that's accurate. I think they're in 5 and 6 and 7 right now. Yeah. So at some point, it doesn't matter what your plan is because you can't get anyone here.
John was an assistant coach at Bryan and Stratton. So John, give them your resume. You might be next up on their list.
Yeah, I think I'd have a few more hurdles to get over. But Kev, I want to ask you this question. Would it be fair to assume that even how poorly they handled this 4 years ago, that they're actually in a worse position now? Because at least when they swung and missed on the candidates back 4 years ago, they had that fallback option of Weitzel with the ability to try and keep the roster together, an experienced head coach. So they swung and missed on those guys, but they were able to fall back on Weitzel, still get you could say 2 years of decent play. This year, they have nobody to fall back on. There is no fallback option.
Yeah. I mean, most that know me, at least personally, know I was not for the hire of their defaulting. I don't know that was a good default program. I think their better default would have been into Brian Hodson. I mean, Mike knows famously that Dane Fife actually tweeted at me because at the time, I thought UB's job was better than Dane Fife at the time of this ranked season, coming off of Oates, who's now heading the #1 program in the country. Yes, they did just lose to San Diego State, but on a one-off, it's a tournament. We talk about it in the NFL all the time. On a one-off basis, that doesn't mean that San Diego State's better. It just means they play a suffocating style of defense. But on a recruiting basis, he's losing Hodgson. Let's see how Oates responds to that. But simply put, he's now heading the #1 team in the country. So he was that good of a coach and had that good of a program. Now, if you look at Buffalo, I do think that they felt they had a fallback in Weitzel. Weitzel came to the table with Ronaldo Segou. He came to the table with Jonathan Williams. He had potentially offering like, hey, here's Josh Mbala. We may or may not be doing this above board, but we think he's going to come here from a top program that had just beaten you. So they felt pretty good that if they had to fall back, they at least had the players, even if Weitzel couldn't get it done. But they didn't realize the X's and O's weren't there, Mike. They didn't realize that the recruiting was never there. Like beside getting Mbala with some interesting tactics, and maybe if you want to consider Skogman, who then transferred, he was supposed to be able to keep players. That was his sell. But then he didn't get the extra years of Williams and Segou, who could have stayed for another grad year. He didn't get the years from Graves, who could have stayed. He didn't get the year from Skogman. He transferred. So at some point, like, there was some issues there. When after the Oates thing wore off, he wasn't able to fill that with anybody. And that's really their only hit. If you want to consider Mbala, that may have ties back to the old regime. And Hardnett did too. You're talking about just Curtis Jones. And that's it in his entire tenure. And that was like really one Curtis Jones season in a year they went under 500. So yes, at face value, it looked like he was a good fallback. Really, Hodgson was a fallback. And a lot of people credit me or say I'm like a big Hodgson defender. At the time, I was just as mad as anybody that he boarded that plane, that I thought he should have stayed back, interviewed, and would have had a good chance. I don't feel like he thought he had a realistic shot at that job. So that's why he did it. But right now, it's discouraging. And that's what a state that I thought the program was in 2019 was that Dane Fife. Well, I feel great about Dane Fife, by the way, who doesn't have a job. But I thought that he was under what I was figuring would receive this job. And then now he got let go. But there is no candidate right now that jumps out to me. They're going to have to go with a D2 candidate. They're going to have to go with a low major team head coach, but they tried those two avenues.
They're not going to get that inspiring hire that you fire a coach looking to take your program to the next level, which is disappointing because you're essentially firing a coach to replace him with most likely an uninspiring coach that will most likely keep you exactly where you are. And now you have to reset your program with new recruits, and it might get worse before it gets even better. So yes, they're absolutely in a worse place now than what they were 4 years ago. And whatever personal things are between Mark Allnut and Brian Hodson baffles my mind. It baffles my mind. I understand he took the plane, and I understand that there might have been some resentment between the two. And I'm assuming there had to be some resentment between the two, because the things that get leaked about Brian Hodson to the general public and people that aren't even part of the program is that he doesn't know the X's and O's, that he can't coach players, that all he can do is recruit. How does that get out to the general public? That's people within UB leaking that because they share that resentment, and they're trying to explain away why they didn't hire him.
Mike, could Weitzel do any of that?
Am I supposed to believe that Brian Hodson doesn't know the game of basketball after being an assistant on NATO staff for the last 8 years? Like, that's crazy to me. Like, yeah, maybe he's not the best teacher. Maybe he's not the best tactician, but I'm assuming he knows the game enough to be a coach and to lead the team. And the fact is, Brian Hodson was a homegrown coach, assistant from Jamestown, who was part of the best 4-year period in UB history, then goes to Alabama, part of one of their best 4-year periods in their history. And you know what? When you don't get Adam Cohen because he declines the job, because you take too long, you don't offer him what he wants, then you don't get Ben McCollum, and then you get turned down by Jared Calhoun. Well, you know what? Maybe Hodson wouldn't have been your choice 1 or your choice 2. But if you at least would have talked to him early in the process, maybe you could have had parameters set up to where Cohen doesn't get it. He says no early. Then you go on to Hodson, and he gladly comes back home. Unless Hodson has some vendetta that he has never publicly made known to anybody, you could have still ended up with an elite recruiter that could have at least helped you reestablish yourself post-Weitzel. Now you have people asking, why did UB fire Jim Weitzel if they didn't want to give the resources to bring in someone that's a substantial upgrade? Like, if you're going to be content with being mediocre or poor, then you just keep Jim Weitzel. It's baffling to me because there are people that were saying on the outside, look at Jim Weitzel's winning percentage, that he's had a good career record, that his second year at UB was actually a good season overall. I will give him credit. Year 2, when the COVID year where he took them to the MAC tournament finals, that was a solid UB team. That was a top 75 Ken Palm UB team. But year 1 fell short of expectations, not even getting to Cleveland. Year 3 was a disappointment because you returned 3 stars and you can't even get past the quarterfinals. And then this year, with his own players, his team had a losing record. So it was obviously trending downwards. Where this gets embarrassing is that they should have had an idea before going to the search how this was going to play out. You had already failed once. How do you still make the same mistakes again? And that's on Allnut, because I will give him credit. For football, he did well with Maurice Linguist. And with women's basketball, I think Becky Burke is going to work out. It's still early, but I think he hit on both of those hires. But he has proven to have no awareness of how to run a men's basketball program at the mid-major level. And when you think about everything that he inherited as an athletic director with this men's basketball team, men's basketball was UB's one opportunity to become a nationally prominent mid-major program. And that is just gone. Like, there's no recovering. Like, we just went from maybe Adam Cohen or Ben McCollum to, is Greg Paulus now going to be a consideration? Is it some low-level coach from
someone
the American Conference or the NEC? Like, it's grasping at straws right now, John.
Yeah, the one thing about Hodson too, that's tough to know, right? Because we don't know, and I don't know, Kevin, if you have any insight into this, but we don't know what necessarily the financial offerings of the UB job are and were. Hodson made $425,000 at Alabama last year. I can't imagine he was going to take a pay cut at Arkansas State. I can't imagine that.
He took a little one.
He did, though.
A little one.
So a minor one to be a head coach, I could see. Okay, maybe, but he wasn't. It's not cut in half, right? He's not.
But how could you be? And granted, a lot of people didn't want Hodson, and I get that. But the donors did want him. So you're going against your donors at UB, and then you're asking the donors, well, we're going to do this $100,000 buyout for Weitzel, but we're not going to listen to what you guys want for basketball. And then we're going to go a completely different direction. We're going to keep asking for donations, but we're not going to go after any of the people that you want. And the people that you might be interested in, we're not going to give them respectable offers. Here's the thing about, and let's just do this about the MAC. I'll just point this out. Jeff Bulls at Ohio is getting paid $581,000 a year. There's other MAC basketball coaches getting paid $600,000+. In football, Candle at Toledo is getting paid $1.1 million in base salary and can make $1.2 million a year. Ohio just extended Tim Albin to where he's getting paid $700,000 a year for football. And I understand football is the money-making sport, basketball is not. But Maurice Linguist is supposedly around that $600,000 mark. Is UB shouldn't be paying basketball coaches $200,000, $300,000. UB, coming off of the 32-4 season, was willing to pay Nate Oates upwards of $800,000. Why, with all the buyout money that they got from the Alabama contract, are they now trying to hire coaches in the $400,000, $300,000 range? I saw a good tweet, and I just want to read it quick. It was from Coaching Changes, which keeps up with all these coaching rumors on Twitter. It said, the reason people keep turning down Buffalo is because they have Everest aspirations with Mariana Trench resources. This is an exaggeration, but we do know candidates keep asking the same reasonable questions and keep hearing the same untenable answers. The fact is, UB fired Weitzel because they wanted to upgrade, and they thought they had a guy or two that would come. And then when presenting the offers to them, they lowballed or didn't match the terms that these candidates want. You cannot go after the rising top assistant coaches in America and expect them to come to your program with lowball offers when you aren't coming off of a successful season or two. Cohen can wait. He will get a job somewhere eventually. He will get something decent. And now, if Brian Hodson does have success at Arkansas State, it's just going to make UB look even worse. Now UB fans are in the unfortunate position where they probably have to root against him, because if he works out, it makes them even more upset. But you think about it. What is wrong with UB right now as a program? I think there's three or four things that come to mind. Number one, SUNY is holding them back big time. In most of these states, the states support their main institutions when it comes to athletics. SUNY does not. They hold UB back. They do not let them put the financial resources to be successful. Number two, facilities. I know UB is getting the one workout area approved, and that's going to be built in the upcoming years. But how many really good D1 programs are sharing practice courts with students for rec centers in intramural basketball? Not many that I know of. Number three, so facilities definitely are not where they need to be. They're not horrible, but they're not great. Number three, NIL. I know NIL is not a huge thing in the mid-major level, but it is quickly changing. Schools like Ohio University and Toledo have NIL collectives where they have the ability to have outside companies pay their athletes. That helps in recruiting, that helps in keeping your players, and coaches care about that. You literally have Jared Calhoun not accepting the UB job while he's at Youngstown State, John. Youngstown State is one of the worst jobs in the country, and he's choosing to stay there over UB because he's already dealing with the drama there, but he doesn't want to take a new job and deal with it anymore. He figures, give me another year or two at Youngstown State, I'll eventually land something better. I don't need to rush out for UB. And you put all this stuff together, John, it's just the allure of their winning years under Oates, it's just gone. They don't have the stuff to attract the best coaches while lowballing them. If they want a good young coach to come to UB, they will have to pony up and pay up. And it is clear they are not able to, or restricted by SUNY.
So my question would be to both of you, when Danny White hired, or I should say when he fired Reggie, a lot of us, some disagreed, some agreed, whatever the case may be, but he went out and got Bobby Hurley. He also was responsible for hiring Leipold, right? That was only 8.5 years ago. What is happening? What is being done behind the scenes? And the way I want to phrase this, what is being done behind the scenes, and what is the thought process that's going into these hirings? Because you talked about the football program, Mike. And while I agree with you on the surface, Mo Linguist seems to be the right hire, we don't know yet. Okay, he's shown flashes of that's what it could be, but it's not there yet. It's not an established program. He needs to really prove that this year. We talk about Becky Burke. She had what a lot of people think is a good season. She still finished 8th in the MAC and is losing her top 4 leading scorers, who are all graduate transfers. So again, we think it's going to be good. We're not sure yet. I think it is. I think she comes with a lot of energy. I think she's going to have that ability to relate to certain players. And I think that's what Hodson does well, is recruit and, really relate to players. But we don't know yet. So right now, we're kind of 2 we think are good and 1 disaster. Under White and Green, we had 3 solid pretty much during those times. So what's the different philosophy you think is going on behind the scenes? Do you think it's just the way that Allnut and this athletic program are approaching these negotiations, maybe with a arrogant type attitude? Or is it simply, does it just make what Oates and Hurley and all these guys did before that much more impressive?
I'll let you go first, Kev.
I think he struggles to know how to run a basketball program personally. I think he struggles to know what to look for. I think he struggles to know what's important. And then you add in the NIL element to it, and it's just completely a botch job. I just thought maybe he figured the past of being a top program would carry itself, that going from, look, you can go from Bobby Hurley to Nate Oates and be the guy. You can follow this along. Here's $350K, whatever it is, 300 to 400K. Look, you look at where Nate Oates is. Look at even Bobby Hurley. Look at where he is. Come here, take this job. You can recruit. Players will play here. The weather's the same inside the gym. Nate Oates' famous line, Brian Hodson as well. And you can get it done in Buffalo. And they're forgetting that things matter. Like, A, maybe people don't want to move to Buffalo. B, NIL budget is important. C, like amount of years and just straight up salary is important. And lastly, can you recruit in this area? That's important too. So I think they're going to have to default to somebody local. Is it McNamara from Syracuse? Are they going to go to St. Bonaventure and pluck their associate head coach? I don't love Paulus as much. Yes, Niagara's like a little bit. You guys know more than me about Niagara. Yes, they're a little bit better, but I need to see a little bit higher than that.
I'm with you, Ken.
Jerry McNamara is where I'd be looking now, or somebody that knows the area, who's worked under, young, aggressive, didn't get the Syracuse job, working under, Boeheim, knows what it takes to recruit players, as obviously he's played in some very large basketball games in his career, similar to a Bobby Hurley hire, right? Would be McNamara in a way. Obviously Hurley had a little bit more tenure, but not crazy amount more than what Jerry McNamara was able to do under those old Syracuse teams who, quite frankly, were top 15 in a lot of seasons. So it's not crazy. He's my number 1 right now based on what I know and what I think. The guy lives here. You can't use the weather. You can't use the move as an excuse. The only thing he could use is not wanting to be in this program. But St. Bonaventure makes sense. You guys talk about them too. Does their associate head? I heard at one point he was in the coaching or the search committee's number 1 guy. So Cohen, Hodgson, Hartman, and Curran were the number, a list of, 2 of them are already out. I don't think Hartman will come here either. So that leaves really from the initial candidates that I heard about that may be interested in search firm approval was Steve Curran from St. Bonaventure. So is he there? Jerry McNamara is a hot name, but I just think that he doesn't know really what he's looking for. He's kind of saying like this job would tell. It's proof. If nothing else is proof, it's other than the $100K he lost instead of firing him on April 6th. Yes, he wanted to get a jump. I really do. In Allnut's defense, and I'm going to bash him from the basketball side, I think he thought he had Cohen and had McCollum as a backup. I really do. Neither of them, he couldn't sell either of them. So that's on him. But at the same time, I do think he had some intel that Cohen would take this job. I've heard as much. He just couldn't seal the deal for a multitude of reasons that may or may not be transparent. But McCollum kind of then was a top choice from the search committee. If they're giving us candidates that won't play here, well, should we be hiring that search firm, that search committee that's just pumping up their own candidates to get a bigger job? This isn't, Nate Oates who put in his time. This is like, we can't be being used as a better job situation right now. So
and I hate the idea of the search firm. I understand.
I think it sucks, and we pay public money for it.
Yeah, I understand why they're used, and they have been helpful for many other jobs in the country. But come on, you're an AD. You should have a general idea who the guys that you'd be interested in for a head coaching spot. You should always have a list of a few people in mind if something were to happen. It's not like you just fire a guy out of left field. If you're from Buffalo and you're the athletic director, and you would know some of the guys that have coaching ties to the area. You would know some of the other guys that you've met through circles and other things like that. You don't need a search firm to tell you about Adam Cohen. He's a local. You don't need a search firm to tell you about a Ben McCollum, who's won 4 national championships in 6 years at the D2 level, or Carlin Hartman. So the justifying the search firm is it's kind of
trying to get them to want to play there, though. Or coach there. Excuse me. That's the reason for them.
And then you have to ask, what is this search firm doing when they're bringing candidates that you can't even close on? They should have parameters all set up. I know I talked about that earlier, but what has changed, I guess, John, was the initial question between when we hired Hurley and what's happening now. I think what happened at that point in time was when they fired Reggie Witherspoon, they had an AD that had big-time motivation. Danny White had his father, who was the AD at Duke. He had connections to Hurley. All Danny White needed to do was talk to his father to get in touch. His father probably had a little bit to do with the relationship building and everything like that. And everything Danny White did was to take the program to new levels. Not everybody always agreed with his New York Bull initiative and all the ways he did stuff. But you think about what Danny White did during his tenure. He brought in Lance Leipold. He brought in Felicia Legit-Jack. He brought in Bobby Hurley, Nate Oates. Those were the 4 best hires in the history of UB sports right there. Then he goes to Central Florida. They have an undefeated season where they claimed the national championship. What does he do? Then he goes to Tennessee. Now look at Tennessee football and basketball. They are elite again. Danny White has vision. Danny White is bold. Danny White is not afraid of failure. So he is what you need with the high ceiling trying to go up to the next level when you're a mid-major. You need to be bold. If you're not bold, you get stuck in the same cycle of, oh, we'll be good once every 3-4 years, and then we'll sign an extension. Next thing you know, you have a coach for 10 years who gets like 2-3 20-win seasons, and you say, it's good enough because we get 2,000 fans per game. So Danny White was able to get Hurley because Hurley had the same ambition that Danny White had. Hurley was at Wagner with his brother, and he wanted to have a chance at being a head coach because he wanted to get to that next level. Oates, simple promotion. You go from high school coach to assistant to head coach in a period of like less than 5 years. That's an incredible rise. Where it got difficult after that point was instead of just simply promoting people, they were trying to convince new people to come to UB. And when they did the original search firm, they wanted, I believe it was Rob Lanier, who became, it was a Georgia State or Georgia Southern, and now he's the SMU head coach. They wanted Lanier. Lanier turned them down, which is even more embarrassing because Lanier had the Western New York ties, I believe, at Bonaventure from being a player there. But why did he decline it? Some of it was money. Some of it was feeling that UB wasn't going to give him what he needed to be successful. So then you settle. And then the same thing here. It's going to be settling again because you can't go into these searches just thinking that your name will carry weight. Yes, for 4, 5, 6 years, UB was a very good mid-major basketball school. But to outsiders, that's really nothing. Like that really doesn't carry a lot of weight to somebody that's not from Buffalo, that hasn't followed the MAC closely. To them, that's one great year. Hell, like you could go through a bunch of mid-majors across the country and say they had one great year. That doesn't mean that you're a program that people want to take over. So maybe it was a little bit too much complacency thinking that UB had hit their mark and that the job would speak for itself. They forgot you have to convince people to come here. And I think Kev's right. It's probably going to end up being a move where you need to find someone with somewhat local ties or someone who just wants that opportunity to be a head coach.
I
Just
think
not Mike
that's
Anderson, guys. Just let's not do retreads.
I think that it's going to be somebody extremely uninspiring, and I hope that I'm wrong, guys. I do. This is not a knock, and I want to preface my comments. This is not a knock on any of the local coaches. It can't be somebody local. It can't be someone that's coaching down the road right now. It can't be.
It can only be Curran if it's a local coach. Curran is the one guy that has the weight to be a head coach.
It can't be Paulus. I mean, we know it's not going to be Reggie. It can't be Paulus. I'm not interested in poaching a Bana assistant coach. They clearly this isn't the time that.
How's he going to out recruit his former guy, his former boss?
Yeah, I got to be honest with you guys. One name that pops into my head, and it, again, no connection to this area, and it very well may not be an option. But Steve Masiello was on the assistant coaching staff of Rick Pitino this year. Rick Pitino went to St. John's. I'm not sure he's bringing Masiello with him. I think Steve Masiello was a great up-and-coming coach 8 or 9 years ago.
Former Manhattan coach.
Yeah, from Manhattan. And I think that could be a guy that could use New York City and Long Island ties to help here. Just a name on the top of my head. Kev, I didn't think of the Jerry McNamara name, but I'm actually a big fan of that name. I think that's a good one.
Associate head coach at Syracuse.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that one too. But again, I'm not sure if he thinks that. I don't know if are they keeping him on staff over there?
Yeah, he's sticking with Syracuse, but
promotion, if I'm not mistaken.
What you have to do if you're Jerry McNamara by staying there, like it's not like outside of Syracuse, he's really a hot head coaching commodity. The question is, would he be ready for a head coaching spot?
Yeah.
But you know what? That same question could have been
12 years under Boeheim. Yeah, 12 years.
So I mean, you'd think, if not now, never.
If we don't think Mac would be ready, then Hodson wouldn't be ready, right? That would be like the biggest
UB
thing.
agrees.
We would like to think that Hudson is a great recruiter, which would put him over the top, right? But we don't know much about how much Mac was responsible in recruiting. We also don't know how much Jim Boeheim let anybody do anything in that program. I have a hard time believing he let anybody go out and do their own thing, and he had a final say over everything. So maybe Mac is looking.
He's only been recruiting his sons over the last 5 years, so
yeah. I mean, he's been relying on Joe Girard for the last 4 years. They haven't had a lot of success. I don't know where they go. Like, I can't sit here and be like, okay, I think that they should go with Joe Blow or Steve Smith. I don't know who they should go with, guys. And because I just think that they are in such a bad position. They're multiple weeks into this search. Guys have been in the portal for weeks. They're being contacted by all different schools about interest. And here we are not having a coach, not having anyone to contact these guys in the portal. More guys from UB are going to leave, which, again, I put on Twitter I don't think is a bad thing. But I just don't know where they go, and I don't know if any hire at this point is going to make people happy. I don't think it's going to have to be proven on the court and in the recruiting pipeline. But if Brian Hodson even has an ounce of success, he just took their Arkansas State's leading scorer was in the portal for a day. He took his name back out because Hodson told him to stay. If that doesn't tell you what type of effect that guy is going to have on that program, then I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, they weren't a great team last year, 13-20, but for the leading scorer to put his name in the portal and take it out 2 days later because he said he had a great talk with Brian Hodson,
and you know what? That's the thing. John, I always tell you, I like the great recruiters when it comes to coaching. Everybody always argues back with me, well, you can't recruit as much when you're the head coach, and that's up to your assistants, and you got to know the X's and O's and manage the game. But the thing about recruiters is they're normally very good communicators. They are very good at understanding people and getting people to want to be part of what they're selling. They're good salespeople in a way, but in another way, you could argue that they are good at cultivating a vision, and what they're selling is something that talented young athletes want to be part of. And what I'm scared with UB is now that they missed out on Cohen and McCollum, the question is, now do you bring in someone that has a bland personality that is either most likely a retread or someone who's getting an opportunity far sooner than what they deserve. And if they're not able to sell that vision, or if they don't even have the proper vision, how do you build around that? I'm sure that when it's all said and done, UB is going to bring someone in and they will try to sell their fan base on it, and that it might end up even being a halfway decent person. It didn't need to be one of these first 5 candidates to be a good overall coach. But the disappointment comes in that I think we all believe that a few of these top candidates were guys that could elevate the program, not back to Nate Oates levels, but to a team that could be one of the top in the MAC and have a chance in a yearly basis to win in Cleveland and go to the NCAA tournament. It's what you see a lot of times in the MAC is how these teams go from being contenders to falling to the middle of the pack to the bottom. Is normally they had that great coach, and then when that coach left, they followed it up with an uninspiring hire. Then they fired that coach, and they followed it up with another uninspiring hire. And then they get in the cycle of losing. Like Miami, Ohio is historically one of the best basketball programs in the Mid-American Conference. They might be – it's really them and Ohio University when you look at it, in Kent State and Akron in the last 20-plus years. But Miami, Ohio – when was the last time we talked about them even being halfway relevant? They've sucked. They have sucked. They had Charlie Coles, who in the late 90s, I believe they went to the Sweet 16, and they were so good up until like 2007, 2008. But when Charlie Coles got to them, I think they replaced him with Lucas, and then they brought in their next coach, and they've had nothing but failure since. But even with that said, let me just pull something up quick with them. Isn't it Travis Ford or Travis Steele that ended up taking their job recently? That was the guy that was head coach at Xavier for the last 4 years. So you were able to still attract a former Big East head coach to be at your school. How is Miami, Ohio able to get a Big East head coach, granted fired, go to them, and UB can't even get the assistant at Xavier? Like, makes you wonder.
It's an issue right now inside the program. They need to reboot quickly. Will they go after a former player? Makes sense to me. That's why I still like the McNamara. He's the associate head coach. They were grossly underpaid as assistants. I'm assuming now, as you're a top assistant at Syracuse, he probably makes a good amount of money now.
By the way,
do you go after
Travis
like
Steele. Just want to get that out of there. Was Travis Steele.
Speedy Claxton from Hofstra?
Turner
so like
Battle reunion? He's
an AD now, right? Isn't that what I heard?
He's the AD
I think at the Park School. Does he want to go into head coaching? I mean, not that he would be qualified, but
he wasn't on any good staffs ever.
Personally, guys, I don't want a former UB player.
I don't want a former UB player.
I don't want
Reggie back.
That's like
serious
20. That's like 2007 Buffalo Bills, like signing the guys because they're like cool for the area. Like no local ties unless it's like I love Will Reagan, but I wouldn't want to hire Will Reagan as the head coach of the Bulls. I mean,
right.
You look at the local guys, right? So like the Ben McCollum-esque type guys in Buffalo, right? So your lower level guys would be Mike McDonald. Been there, done that, Division I. Mike does a great job at Damon. Don't want to go down that route, okay?
People will say Bill Beeline at NCCC, but UB is not in a position to hire college.
I don't think Bill Beeline is there. Honestly, I think Bill Beeline does a great job at where he's at, and I think Bill Beeline would be great to get a head coaching job. I actually think Bill Beeline would be a good hire for Canisius, to be honest with you. I don't know what Bill Beeline's ability to recruit outside of the area is. He does a great job locally here from Rochester, Buffalo. Just the state of New York in general. I think he's an interesting candidate, not necessarily for this job at this moment. I do think he's an interesting candidate. You look at I don't want to speak too much on him because he's a friend of mine, but Damone Brown at Bryan and Stratton, he's another local guy, Canisius ties. Again, don't know this opening might be it. Outside of that, there's no other lower level coaches. The Duville coaches, a guy from Baylor, he won 4 games. You're not talking about guys that are UB-esque type guys. So you have to go outside of the box. And that box now has just it's an insurmountable size. Where do they even start, right? And that's the biggest question. So I want to phrase it very simply to both of you guys, but if your money was on this, what do you think the timeline is? And do you think that they end up settling for somebody
Soon.
soon?
The
just
timeline
to get
soon.
somebody locked in.
Yeah, that's the timeline soon. They need to justify letting him go. I don't know if he's officially. Why not pay him his base salary for 2 weeks? I don't know. That should be less than the 100K savings that she'll make. So legally, he might be on the books. So I don't know how that plays a role. Maybe not. And if not, it's soon that they need to make a move and a decision, because you need to start recruiting. You just lost your entire team. Sure, you have a chance to claw some of them back. Maybe. I don't know who you'd want other than Curtis Jones. Maybe make sure you're keeping Isaac Jack. There's a couple other names that might be. Adams hasn't officially done anything.
I'm good with them all leaving. I'm good.
Yeah, like whatever. But you might want to, get in there and start. It's going to be. I think April 1st is a pretty big deadline, and you need to pivot now that you're 1, 2, 3, and maybe 4 have declined you. So I do believe that you need to make sure you make the right selection. But I think it's got to move fast. They got to justify hiring the search firm again. They have to justify making the move 100K earlier. So there's definitely some speed that needs to happen here in this job search. And I do believe, like anyone, either they use a search firm connections or just like you mentioned, these names aren't foreign. They have to have a list now that these 4 are gone, and eventually they're going to get one of these individuals to accept a job. Someone will take the job that has some type of pedigree.
And Kev,
it's
just
like, I'll take it.
How
Kev,
low?
It's not just recruiting. You have to put a staff together, and all those assistants are getting plucked up. What UB has to do right now, they're almost in the unfortunate position where they've been declined by so many people, and we're getting to that Final Four period when most people want to have their hire by, where UB has to probably bring somebody in the next 2 weeks. They have to, they will either have to pony up and go convince SUNY to give them the money to make the hire, or they're going to have to make the uninspiring hire where they bring somebody in that was less than what they wanted.
What's interesting, Mike, though,
but I will say that
employed.
If you make the uninspiring hire, give them the cheapest contract you can, accept that things are going to be tough, and if he sucks after a year or two, after a couple of years, you move on, you fire, you restart the process again. Because the only way I want to give a coach right now a big contract is if there's still someone out there that warrants it. If you cannot get someone that is at least halfway respectable, there's no reason to commit long-term to any of these guys coming in. And I fear right now what's going to end up happening is that Western Michigan a few years ago made a hire after firing Hawkins where we knew it was going to fail. And it did. And then they moved on from that guy shortly. So what's UB going to do? We'll just have to wait and see. But I don't think many of us are going to be that happy. And the sad thing is Weitzel led a huge regression with the program, and I think they might be even in an even worse place next year than what they would have been if they had just kept him, which doesn't mean that they were wrong to fire him. It means that they were wrong not to handle this search better than what they have.
Just remember the last thing is Brandon Foley is still employed by the university. So whether what he's doing, he removed his former assistant coach at Buffalo from his profile. Now he's back to assistant coach at Buffalo. So maybe the idea is that at least you're going to start with one assistant coach. And right now it would be, obviously Thorpe was Weitzel's guy. He's gone. What happens with Coach Quarles, I'm not sure, but it does seem like Foley at least will have the starting point for the recruiting coach, as he's since now said in his own bio, assistant coach, recruiting coordinator at UB. He had former in there a week ago. So it is an interesting little note that I think you're going to start with Foley because they have to be in on recruiting. He's got to turn in his reports and who he wants to target immediately to the new head coach. So at least they'll start with him. And it's an interesting little nugget. I guess he could get fired in theory if the new coach comes in with like a whole staff right away. But Mike, to your point, I think part of this, just like in any sport, NFL included, you come in with a list of candidates. You're like, this, and this is my plan. These are my coaches. 3 out of these 6 guys will be on our staff. I believe that's part of the visit and your interviews, interview process.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I know we got to let you go, but we appreciate you jumping on and talking hoops with us.
Thanks, guys.
We'll get you back on once they decide to make this hire, but definitely.
Yeah, look forward to it. Yeah, look forward to it and tuning into your show as always. But it's going to be an interesting one. It's definitely one of the more interesting searches I've ever seen and been a part of, at least on the mid-major level. So looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say in the future episodes.
All right. Thanks, Kev.
We'll see you later.
Mike, one thing I want to add on to your point here, and we're going to wrap up in a couple minutes on this topic, but you talked about the existing coaching staffs. And I think that's a really good point, Mike, because we've talked a lot in this episode about how much Cohen means to Xavier and how much Hodson meant to UB and how much he means to Oates and how much he'll mean to Arkansas State. Putting together a staff is almost as important as the hire you make, because they are responsible for a majority of the initial processes in recruiting. Okay. When I recruited at, a scholarship level, granted a little bit lower of a scholarship level, most of the initial contacts were gotten by myself and the other assistant coach. That contact, that relationship is developed. It's then matured, and over time, then it's incorporated with Coach Brown. And Coach Brown was the one that finalizes the process. He seals the deal. Okay. But let's just say Mac is the hire, Jerry McNamara. Let's just hypothetically throw it out. Okay. You have to give Mac, who's never been a head coach, time to get a staff he feels comfortable with, a staff he feels secure with, and he trusts to go get him players and to help with that recruiting part. Because at the end of the day, if he doesn't get the players, Mike, it's on him. He's the one that loses his job. Granted, the staff's gone too, but it's on him. It looks like he couldn't recruit, right? And you could argue that Weitzel didn't have the staff in place to recruit. But it could also mean that he wasn't able to seal the deal either. I think Brian Hodson's ability to garner respect yet have so he walks that line, Mike, that's so hard to do, where you want to be friendly and cool and fun, have this great relationship with your players, but you also need to command a level of respect. Okay. And you need to balance that. You don't want to just be bad cop all the time, but you also can't be 18, 19, 20-year-olds buddy. Okay. I think Hodson from the outside does a tremendous job in tiptoeing that line where he gains so much trust and respect from his players. They're so cool with each other, but they also respect him to the point that they don't take advantage of him and think of him as a friend. That's what UB has to find. And from the first feeling, I get that same sense from Becky Burke on the women's side. She has the ability to relate tremendously with her players while also commanding respect. Now UB has to hire a person to do that. And I am just perplexed at how they could get this wrong twice. To be turned down, Mike, by three different people at three different levels, Mike. You're turned down by an assistant coach at a high major with Buffalo ties. You're turned down by a high level, maybe the highest level Division II coach. And you're turned down by a mid-major coach 3 hours down the road, 4 hours down the road. I am just at a loss of where they go from here. That's where I'm at, Mike. I just don't know where they go.
Yeah, it reeks of an athletic department that just doesn't know what they're doing. It really that's what it comes across as. And that's why Mark Allnut, I believe, deserves a huge amount of the blame. Like we said earlier on the show, we both think that there's potential with his football hire and his women's basketball hire.
Yep.
It's still early. We don't really know conclusively yet with either, but there's signs. Becky Burke had really helped that roster get better throughout the season to where they nearly upset Toledo in the MAC quarterfinals, and that Rockets team ended up winning a game in that NCAA tournament. So that was tremendous development over the course of the season. And she has a very strong recruiting class coming in. Mo Linguist has had strong recruiting classes, and they just finally had a winning season in year 2 and won a bowl game.
Yep.
The issue with men's basketball is that how do you not learn from your previous mistakes? How do you not learn?
About Mike are going this way.
Yeah.
Basketball's going down. That's the biggest difference.
The shame of it is I think the men's basketball team is the one team that has the most potential at UB and has the most potential for area support. Like, yes, UB football is always going to average 11, 12, 13,000 fans per game. But when you're talking about football, that's really not that much. UB, when they're winning, they could get 4, 5, 6,000 at Alumni Arena if they were consistently good to top tier mid major, which isn't incredibly difficult. It's not easy, but you get a good coaching staff, you get solid recruiters. That's something that if you bring in high enough level talent and coach them up, you have a chance to do it. We see on a yearly basis the top teams in the MAC hover around the top 100 in Ken Palm. There's no reason why UB can't be that. Yeah. But John, it ultimately comes down to this. They failed 4 years ago because they couldn't convince people to take the job despite coming off a 32-4 season. This year, they're coming off a losing record. That you would have thought they would have learned in those 4 years that you are not selling candidates the job just based on what your program is. This is, Ohio University, Akron, Kent State, they can maybe hire a coach that isn't going to go there for the most money in the world. The difference being Akron and Kent State have been consistently good for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
UB has been good for the past decade, but before that, it was off and on. And the one thing about Ohio is that they have one of the best campuses in the MAC. They have tradition, and they have a very good recruiting. Not Athens, Ohio, but state of Ohio has a bunch of high caliber athletes in the high school ranks in AAU.
Yeah.
UB, you need to step it up a little bit. And it just doesn't seem like Allnut has awareness regarding the actual perceived value of the basketball program. When you get turned down by a Buffalo native who was a student, a grad assistant, I believe, for the program, who loves everything Buffalo and seemingly was interested in the position to begin with. When you get turned down by someone like that, it means you pretty much had to be insulting with your offer, or something happened with his situation, whether on the court or off the court, that led to him having a differing opinion as the NCAA tournament process went on.
Either way, it's concerning, Mike, because you would never have thought just 4 short years ago that they would ever would be in this situation again at all, but again.
And I'm not even saying we expect them to be what they were with Nate Oates. Like, Nate Oates is a fantastic, that's a once in a lifetime type head coach for UB. And yeah, in hindsight, expectations were too high for UB once he left. But I don't think I would have ever accepted them becoming a borderline 200 Ken Palm team. Like, I thought, okay, I'm hoping they're going to stay in the top 60 to 70. I understand that they fall to 90 to 100, but they weren't falling to 90, 100. They're falling 120, 130, 190, 200 now.
You got to look on the court too, Mike. They got blown out by 20, 30 points multiple times this year.
By their peers, by MAC teams.
Exactly. Their offense looks like garbage, and the quality of player just is not there what it once was. Those kids play hard, okay? The effort level was not a question. The talent wasn't what it was, and the system was not designed to use the players' talents for the betterment of the team. That's what I saw. I saw individually talented guys in a system that was not utilizing everybody's capabilities. So was the talent maybe a little bit better than what we think it was? Maybe, but I don't think it was much better. I think that he had a lot of guys that were just okay at a few things, but not a lot of guys that were great at many things. And that's no knock. There's some decent basketball players on the team. Curtis
they
Jones,
weren't bringing in the guys that their peers that they consider themselves at the same level of in the MAC were bringing in. You look at Toledo, they had Rollins. He gets drafted in the NBA draft. Ohio had Jason Preston gets drafted by the Clippers. You have when you look at Kent State, Sincere Carey. You have Jacobs on Akron. You had Ali transferred to, I believe, Butler, but then you bring in Enrique Freeman, who is a beast. You have Xavier Castaneda. You have even JT Shoemate at Toledo, who was a D2 transfer. who's bringing in. Look at the difference between JT Shoemate, a D2 transfer, and then Armani Foster, a D2 transfer. Big difference there.
Yeah.
So and if we're even talking, I know this is an exception, but even Imani Bates going to Eastern Michigan, like it was clear under Weitzel at the beginning. Weitzel was bringing in names. Josh Mbala was a good addition, and there was some guys that there was hope for with obviously LaQuill Hardnett and some of the other transfers, but it's only gotten worse.
Yeah,
and the regression was clear, and that's why I will always say I don't blame them for firing Weitzel. I blame them for not having the answer to replace him. That's a fire. Like, you only fire him if you believe you really have a guy all
absolutely. Absolutely. So, this isn't Syracuse. There's no endless money. This isn't Duke. Like, even Syracuse with endless money. Within hours.
That's why I've said Allnutt's handling of the men's basketball program the last 4 years is borderline fireable. Like, I give him credit. He's raised money for football so they could get the field house. He's done a good job from the football side of things.
Yeah.
The women's basketball has been decent. So, like, an athletic director shouldn't be judged based on just one sport. But UB basketball was always their potential. And you see St. Bonaventure paying Coach Schmidt over $1 million. I think it's close to $1.5 million. And UB is struggling to pay their coaches $300,000, $400,000.
Yeah.
And we'll just, I really, last thing I'll say today, John, I know people know that I'm a big fan of Brian Hodson, but I just hope that doesn't end up being something that they regret. They get turned down
for Brian Hodgson's sake. For Brian Hodgson's sake, I hope it is something that UB regrets, right? Because I don't think we would want to root against him for that.
You get turned down by 3 coaches, and then there was one coach who's an assistant on the number 1 team in the country. He probably would have gladly come back, and you don't even get in contact with him.
Yeah, you don't know that for sure, but you would like to think, Mike, with a decent offer and a show of good faith, that he would have liked to come back and see this program.
And the people on the message boards, because I love the people on UB Fan. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. But for those that were doubting Brian Hodson's coaching abilities and saying he doesn't know X's and O's, he's not ready to be a head coach, he's too immature. Well, we're going to find out soon.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you could have said all those things about he wasn't ready for the job, but ask yourselves this: when UB eventually does make their hire, who do you think will be the better candidate? Who would you rather have when it's all said and done?
Yeah.
If it ends up being a Greg Paulus, if it ends up being a Gary McNamara or whoever they end up bringing in, would you rather have that candidate or would you rather have Brian Hodson?
Yeah, it's a fair point, Mike. It's a fair point, and hopefully we'll have that answer soon. But our last comment here on our chat, Mike, is Brian was the answer. Ironically enough, we'll have our answer to that question soon, and obviously one of our listeners thinks that he was the answer, and it's hard to disagree, Mike. It's hard to disagree. So that's gonna wrap up our show today, Mike. It's glad to be back talking. I know the season is over, but I'm happy to be back talking hoops. I hope to be back talking soon with an answer to this coaching search and hopefully a little bit more positive outlook on this program. But I think as a consensus, Mike, right now, it is tough to be positive about the outlook of UB basketball, at least in the short term. Who knows, Mike? There are good candidates out there. And if they're able to rectify the situation fairly quickly, they may be able to get one of those people to come, because you can learn. It's never too late to learn from your mistakes. And if they learn from a mistake they've made through these negotiations with their top choices, it may be able to work something out. But I think for right now, Mike, I think we're both a little bit bleak.
One last thing, too. This is just a text that I got. I'm not going to say who, but there is one of the things that might have played into Cohen's decision was convincing his family to come to Buffalo as well,
and that's nothing. And honestly, Mike, that's a lot of things that are outside of Buffalo's control.
Yes.
We can't control where we are. A lot of people put roots down, and they have a family and they want to stay, and that's totally fine. But to think that he's going to be at Xavier for 20, 30 years is probably not realistic either, right?
And
So,
he had just moved there this
yeah,
past year.
yeah,
But you're right. He's going to be a head coach soon. So,
you're gonna have to
and
move.
being a Buffalo guy where he loves this area, if there is credibility to that, that'd be disappointing to hear that they
Yeah,
couldn't even have a Buffalo guy convince his family to come to this area. And I get it. Not everybody is suited to live in Buffalo. Not
yeah,
everybody loves the snow, the cold climate, and it's obviously a place where some of us love it, like you and I, and some people it's not meant for them.
yeah,
But unfortunately, I think um, prior perceptions of the area are negative for
yeah,
some, and the cold weather turns a lot of people away. And UB can't control that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
if that is the case, unfortunate to hear.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right, Mike. Well, we're going to wrap up the show today. I appreciate you taking the time, and also thanks to Kevin Massari who joined us earlier in today's show. But yeah, we'll hope for better news on the UB coaching front soon. But this was another episode of Talking Big Four Hoops. He's Mike Bunt. I'm Jonathan Snyder. We appreciate everyone tuning in, taking some time out of your Monday night.